The last time I did a keybind guide was over 3 years ago, and I think this keybind guide needs an update. So today I'm going to be doing just that, doing an updated keybind guide. So to start out from square one, what is a keybind? A keybind is simply a input that you put on an ability bar, like a typing key, to then activate abilities, so that way you don't have to sit there and click them all over the place. You can just press a input and it will do it for you. Like if I just run my hand over some of these inputs that I have here, you'll see them in gold. It's highlighting the ones I'm pressing at the time, and it allows you to control a lot of things like in the inventory or combat or overhead prayers. You can pretty much keybind just about anything in game as long as it can go on an action bar, and it frees up a lot of mouse movement so you can focus on player movement. You can interact with things or click targets to attack, although targeting you can even do with a keybind. Like if I press this button here, as you can see, it targets the guard over there. So even things like targeting can be keybound, which in general is going to make things easier because you're not focused on click accuracy and click timing. There's also some things with how the game runs that keybinds tend to work a bit nicer and allow some things to happen more fluidly than, say, with clicking everything. But in short, that is what a keybind is. Now I have my webcam up there. I'll go ahead and bring it up to a full screen, but when talking about keybinds, I'll just talk about what the peripherals that I'm using real quick. For the keyboard, this is just a pretty standard keyboard. It happens to have Cherry MX Blue switches in it because I like the clicky sound it makes, but any keyboard will do just fine. Now, something to keep in mind is that if you have a 10 key, these number inputs will be the same as these ones as far as the game is concerned. It does not differentiate between numpad and standard number keys, but in game, most of the other keys, like say insert, delete, end, home, page up, page down, most of the F keys work just fine as inputs in the game. And for the mouse, I am personally using a Corsair Scimitar RGB. I think this is the Elite. I don't think it's the Pro. Version doesn't matter too much, but it is an MMO mouse. It has, if I can bring it up here, get the lighting just right, it has two middle click buttons just behind the scroll wheel, and on the side here, if I get it just right so it's not completely blown out, as you can see, there are 12 thumb buttons on the side. And what this allows you to do is use your thumb to hit a bunch of inputs that would normally be pretty annoying to hit over on the keyboard. And other companies make MMO mice. I think Logitech makes one still. They might not, but I can't quite remember. I think Razer still makes one. I think there's like 6 or 7 companies in total making MMO mice that have some sort of thumb button layout. I've seen some with like 5. I've seen someone with 8. I personally like the 12 because it's just a simple grid pattern. I think I've even seen some with more, but all of them come with some sort of mouse software. So if I load up IQ, which is the Corsair software, actually would help if I was on the right screen. There we go. And I'll just hide those real quick so that way you can see what's going on. This is the IQ software. And if I click on the mouse here, it'll bring up the mouse specific menu in here. And this is my RuneScape profile. I think it comes with like some default ones. Like I have one for editing. I have one for Minecraft, but we're going to be focusing on the RuneScape one because that's the game we're talking about today. And if I click on key assignments here, down here in the assignments category, you'll see a bunch of different keystrokes, and all it's doing is taking one of the keys, either a thumb button or one of the middle clicks. If I go up to here, as you can see, it's highlighting it in light gray. It's taking the profile switch button on the mouse and then reprofiling it to just be a standard typing key, and it functions as such. Actually, if I bring no board over here, as you can see, like this one for instance is the right bracket. So if I press right bracket, obviously it just shows up. You can even do the webcam here. So if I'm pressing the right bracket as a typing key, that's how it normally works. But if I hit the mouse button, if I press this one here on my mouse, it essentially acts the same exact way. It is a full-on one-to-one input. It is as if you're just pressing the key normally. And you might be thinking to yourself, why does this matter at all? Well, for number one, it is a comfort thing that allows you to utilize keys that are over here on this section of the keyboard more easily because you can just press them with your thumb. Like, I even have relatively large hands, like hitting Shift plus I plus K or plus M. Like, I can hit all of these with relative ease. It is a little bit of a stretch, but some people will definitely struggle to even hit like Shift plus G or H. And having thumb buttons like this, or just reprogrammable keys in general, will allow you to have a much easier time using said keys. But the big note here is that these are all one-to-one inputs. If I just go ahead and scroll through all of these or click on all of them, you can see it'll highlight the different thumb button and what it is. Now, some of these are like F1 and F3. Those were already my weapon inputs in Scape, but I didn't want to rebind them to something else because I do like a bit of redundancy in some of my keybinds. So that way, if my muscle memory kicks in and I just hit F1, F3, then it still works. Although now that I think about it, I've pretty much broken that muscle memory. So maybe I'll change those in the near future. But some form of redundancy can be nice on things if you're trying to get rid of some muscle memory and move over to new binds. Anyways, though, I digress. Like, you can see, like, I have equals here, apostrophe, /, left bracket, colon, things like this, which are pretty annoying to hit. That's what I have bound on most of these thumb buttons. And the specific thing that's really important is RuneScape, as far as I'm concerned, and anytime I've ever asked a JMod, they said one-to-one is perfectly fine. Mouse keys, which is built into Windows, allows you to do mouse movements and other things like that, and that's been okay in the game forever. I remember watching a bunch of old YouTubers doing like the 5 bil, the 5.2 bil race, things like that, using mouse keys on like construction. But as far as I'm aware, if you keep your inputs to one-to-one, you will be just fine. It's when you get into things like 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, that's where you get into some shaky waters, and it's considered against game rules. And I think some programs like AHK are outright banned, but I'm not sure if that's for RS3 or if that's just for old school or what the situation is with AHK. I personally never use the software, as this whole setup has been more than enough, and I wouldn't recommend you use anything over one-to-one. I never have used anything over one-to-one. I don't think it's necessary to run anything over one-to-one. And on things that I get questions on the most is how do I do all of my armor switches, and I'll talk about the specifics later on when we get into like more like hybrid setups and really get into the weeds of keybinds on what I'm doing there. But I wanted to cover this as a topic because it is something I get questions about. But as you can see, these are all keystroke rebinds. You're just taking one key and changing what it is inputting. These are not macros, these are not automations, there's not anything like that here on this profile. And that's how I've always played RuneScape. So we'll go ahead and get back to the main game and actually talk about the binds that I use. So here are the actual binds that I am using. Now, I have one of my recent Amasket presets here just to kind of fill out all of the binds, but don't let this overwhelm you. I'm just talking about the inputs themselves for now. We'll get into a little bit on setups later on, but for now we'll start with the main action bar. The main action bar is the one with your HP, your adrenaline, your prayer, and your summoning points. And these are where I keep the abilities and other things that I press the most often. And being I'm going to press a lot of these buttons the most often because they're the main abilities for the combat styles I try to keep these binds as simple and straightforward as possible. Now, for my hand position, because I was taught in school like the home row typing key method where you have your pointer fingers on F and J, my left hand has always naturally been over on this side of the keyboard, which I assume most of you are going to be the same. And so I didn't really differ from it at all. So I have Q, W, E, R, A, S, D, F, Z, X, C, V. These are all keys that I can easily hit just by moving my hand up and down like so. And these are all my main ability inputs. I didn't do any modifiers on these keys, like using Shift, Control, or Alt, because I didn't want any complications added with these inputs. These are things I'm going to be spamming a lot. And a reason I chose these ones specifically specifically is they make a nice, if I bring up the webcam here, they make a nice like rectangle shape that my hand can just sit and I can kind of do anything I need to and use any finger to really hit any of the inputs. And it gives me quick access to things like the number keys up here, and I can stretch out kind of far. I can go up to the F keys and do things with those. I can reach out with my pointer finger and hit things like T, G, and B, N and M, H, Y, U, and J. Now I understand that for some people this is going to be a bit of a stretch trying to use this, and this type of stuff really isn't too natural for some people. I do have the added benefit of playing bass and guitar for over 15 years, so my hands are kind of used to all these complex shapes and whatnot, but the principle still stands of having your main inputs in a nice block where your hand naturally rests to then hit anything that you need to, as you're going to be hitting these quite a bit. Now when looking at the secondary bars that I have, they are kind of a jumbled mess right now, and this is going to be a little bit of more of a UI type of idea, but I keep my action bar in the middle here because then I can use my peripheral vision to then look at anything without really taking my eyes away from the center. I just have a natural point that I look down to, use peripheral vision to kind of dart around as needed, and then go back to looking at the boss fight or whatever I happen to be doing in the game view. And so things that I want to keep cooldowns on, I've kept them kind of close. Like all of my defensives, I keep clustered around here. And these are all things that I'm still going to be hitting. I'm going to be hitting these less often, but I definitely want them to remain simple inputs. Like T is a simple, straightforward input. It's not within the main block of keys that I'm hitting. I do have to make a conscious decision to go press it, so that way I can train my muscle memory to always go for T whenever I need to resonance. I think of resonance, instantaneously move over. Also things like freedom, anticipation, devotion. These are all ones that I'm going to be pressing the most often, so they are on number keys, and it's not grouped in this bar, but my food input number 1, and if I do have any sort of blubbers or any sort of solid foods, I will use the eat food and have that on number 2. So all of these main things that you're going to be hitting, while I am hitting food or defensive abilities less often, they are still vitally important to combat, and you want them on quick access keys to make a conscious decision to go and press. They're not in your main area of control, but they are still within reason to be pressing. Now other things like reflect or debilitate, or if I am going to keybind things like immortality or barricade, these are defensives that are still important in some situations, but I don't use them as much, so I put them on shift modifiers, as shift for me is the most natural modifier to hit. They're still important abilities in some situations, they're accessible, but I'm not pressing them nearly as often, so it's fine for me to put them on modifiers. I'm not using them nearly as often as something like res or divert or freedom, anticipate, or devotion. Now a quick note on using modifiers with keybinds: the order of operations in which you use a modifier is important. If you're going to use one, make sure you hold down the modifier during the entire duration of the button press, and as you will see, with no problem, it'll highlight it every single time. I can go through and just press all these. It's not too big of a deal. They're going to highlight, they're going to work just fine. But if you release your modifier early and you have something bound on the same input, like say A here, you'll notice that it'll hit both at once because I lifted off of shift before I fully lifted off of A. And if you go in the opposite order and press A and then shift and kind of roll through them, it'll also hit both of these inputs. So this is something to keep in mind, and this might be why some of you are struggling with using modifiers. It is because you're not holding down the modifier during the entire duration of the button press for the ability in which you have bound. All right, so moving to the actual inputs on my thumb buttons, these are generally reserved for weapon switches, overhead prayers, and other combat items that I'm going to be using a lot. And I do have if I go over to magic, I'll have have a better example for this. But as you can see here, I have two individual slots for my dual wield. And if I go like to my two-hander and I go to my dual wield, it works just fine. They're all, you know, just standard inputs. But I keep these inputs in a vertical orientation on my thumb button. So if I go to full screen here, my thumb naturally rests on the two inputs for main hand and offhand. So that way I just press in the center and hit both of them at once, and allows me to have a very clean transition between dual wield and two-hander because I'm just literally pressing both of the buttons at once. This corner thumb button, it doesn't really have any permanent slots anymore. This used to be a defender slot back when defenders were useful, but I haven't found a use case for defenders anymore, so it is what it is, and I just use it for holding like random niche abilities or other random niche items. Like if I quickly pull out a melee set, say with something like Karis, I might use this to hold like a secondary main hand weapon swap, something that I'm not going to be pressing as often, but it's still next to the offhand button, so I can use whatever main hand I want and then have a second main hand. But if I'm on two-hander, I can still press, actually a two-hander for this work, but if I'm on two-hander and I want to go to the Langs for a Lang spec, I can still hit those two as they're next to each other. But as you can see, overhead prayers, weapon switches, and other sorts of combat gear like that. Like for range, I have all of my different quivers bound here on thumb buttons. Now over here on this action bar, I do have all of my EOFs bound, and the eagle-eyed among you have probably already noticed that this bar switches a lot. And the way to set up this entire thing where you just click something and it switches to a different bar entirely is something known as bar binding. If I hit escape here, settings, go into gameplay, combat and action bar binding, you can enable these two items here and set up a bunch of different, they're called setups in here, but you could think of them as like little mini presets. But essentially you're just telling the game to associate a specific combat style or specific weapon type inside of a combat style to be bound with a certain type of action bar. So if I go back to Magic real quick, you'll see that I have my dual wield bar here, and the only thing that's switching here is a Magma Tempest versus a Combust. But they are two separate action bars. You can also notice this number switching here if I switch between the two. And if I go back into settings and scroll down to where I was, as you can see, it says here in setup number 6, you can have this in any of the setups, but it's telling the game when you're equipping magic two-handed weapons like an FSOA, that on the main action bar, you want this specific action bar to pop up in said main action bar slot. Now, your bars are going to be completely different from mine. Like some people are probably going to have their two-handed bar on like bar number 4, or maybe they want to keep everything super organized, but you'll have to go in and tell it which specific action bar for you it happens to be the case for. But I only have the main bar and one of my secondary bars swap. If you're getting really advanced, you might be able to have a third one switch for like some hybrid stuff if you need other binds, but that's really advanced and kind of out of the scope of this video. And this will lead me into something I also think is important, just like I said before, of having the same main hand slots bound, the same offhand slot for all styles or two-handers. All of that good stuff is, if I go to my melee setup here, you'll notice I have things like Decimate and Cleave in the same slot under the same keybind, as these are the two building blocks for dual wield and two-hand switching, at least as far as melee is concerned. These are your bread and butters, so having similar abilities on similar inputs is definitely something I would recommend, so that way you're not completely confusing yourself. I didn't 100% follow this, but I kept it within a certain realm of not completely insane. Like melee dual wield, my basics are all over here on this side. If I go to range, they're all kind of over here on this side. Magic, it's kind of the same story, but my basics are kind of split, and I have Omni Power over here, but this is more so because I've been playing for so long, and in the grand scheme of things, Omni Power being used in rotations is a relatively new thing, ever since Zuckcape mainly, so I've kind of shoehorned things in over the years. But the big picture is keeping similar abilities abilities in similar slots, keybound to the same inputs, so that way learning new combat styles as you start adding them into things that you're doing will make the learning process a lot more simple. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in more detail, I mentioned it in the beginning of this video, how you can target different things with keybinds, and that is a concept known as target cycling. Now, if you're just going to use this for general purpose PVM, what you do is you do the same thing before you hit escape. You go into settings, and under the gameplay tab, you go down to targeting, and these are all of my current settings. I'll go over them individually, but essentially you can have it display the target information when you're hovering over a target. So like if you just hover over something, you see the man there is weak to earth spells, things like this. Targeting reticles, it'll show the thing on the ground. So if I hit target cycle again, it'll show these little red reticles on the ground of what you are targeting. Now, the way I'm controlling this is target cycling keybinds. The only one that you will generally need for PVM is cycle target forwards keybind. So you go here, go to keybind, and then all I did is on this input, I just put the mouse button that it was bound to by literally just pressing the button. Whatever you have it set into in the software, you can do that, at least if you're using target cycle on something like a mouse input, or just put whatever you want here, whatever is easy for you to hit, as you're going to be using it quite often. Now, the other important settings with this are to have it set on radial instead of conal, so that way you can target things behind you and pretty much a full 360. Set the maximum target distance all the way to the right, because you definitely want to be targeting things as far out as you can. I would not do set target maximum distance to weapon distance, as this will make the game feel a bit more clunky. I would leave this option off, and that's all you really need to worry about. I would not do direct targeting at all. I would do cycling target forwards, and in a couple of very specific PVM instances, people will do backwards target cycle. The only one that comes to mind off the top of my head is for Solak arms and legs, and for targeting the core that comes out after arms and legs. But keeping just a single input for the forward keybind will be perfectly suited for you in 99.99% of use cases in this game. And the very last topic I wanted to cover in this keybind guide, it's a little bit more of an advanced thing for the more advanced players, but it is how I'm controlling like hybrid swaps and all of this stuff. It sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. In the big picture, you have two combat styles in a hybrid setup. I will be doing a hybrid DPS guide in the future if you want like the details on why people are doing this. The quick down and dirty version is your ultimate with a combat style has a 1 minute cooldown, but it doesn't last a minute. So you bring in a second combat style to use its ultimate in place of the cooldown duration that you still have to wait for style number 1's ultimate to come back online and be pressed again. So essentially you're just benefiting from doing more damage overall, because you're cranking out more ultimates per minute, and ultimates give a better damage buff than none. And when you're doing hybrid, you're gonna have to swap to a completely different combat style. So that means bringing different gear swaps, maybe a different ring swap, the weapons for each combat style that you need, any potential combat specific swaps, and all of these things need to be keybound in some form or way. I do see a lot of people go through and click, and if you lock your inventory, this can be made a little bit easier, but things can happen where, say you're on one style that has just a two-hander, and things can get quite messy because then they're moving around and you can't click and move things and drag them back. So I would just flat out recommend keybinding everything. And what I do is on this secondary bar right here, I have it all spelled out right in front of me, and I use a different modifier for each combat style. So for me, alt is the main combat style of whatever I'm using, and control is the secondary combat style. And these are all the bottom 8 thumb buttons. You might notice there's only 7 here. Number 8 is over in the corner because I literally don't have room here. But all I do, I'll bring up the full screen webcam real quick, is I either press control or I press alt depending on what style I want to switch to next. And then with my thumb on the bottom 8 thumb buttons going this way, I will just hold down the modifier I want and roll my thumb across all the thumb buttons. That is all I do for all of my hybrid swaps when doing gear switches. And I'll do it here on the full screen cam with the webcam up and no board. If I press Alt, run over all of the binds. It's a very simple way to do this all in one game tick because your thumb is just rolling over all of the thumb buttons in this type of motion. Okay, I didn't even know I could do that in OBS, but good to know. One of my thumb buttons is actually bound to a scene in OBS. That's crazy. You learn something new every day. But what I was saying is this motion with my thumb is all I'm doing. You can also use like the tip of your thumb and drag across all inputs. And I have done that before. Let me see if I can uncrop this a bit to make it a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. That should work. And what I was saying is you can then also like drag. So say I want to go back to magic here, hold over and just drag my thumb across all of them. If you put too much pressure after like 3 or 4 hours, you can definitely wear on your thumb a bit. I still have a relatively okay callus on my thumb from all of my bass playing days, but this is something that you just could watch out for, or don't do the like full-on gorilla grip type thing that I end up doing when I'm hybriding, and you can just kind of lightly glide over your buttons and it'll be just fine. The reason I bring up this method instead of like this method is I can do this with my thumb. I don't know if that's natural or not, but I can do all sorts of things like this. And so for me, this motion of just rolling my thumb through, very natural. But again, if you can't do that, I guess it's like being double jointed or something, but I have it like on both my thumbs. I can kind of do things like this, but essentially mush all of the thumb buttons at once for the swap, and that's how the swap is done. Another thing that is important with hybrid setups is having all of the style specific EOFs, and I just have that on the bar that swaps with the weapon input, and I have 4 slots for EOFs. I toss in whatever ones I want in the bind, and then the EOF input is always the same, so no matter the combat style. I have all of my range specific ones bound here, swap over to magic, and then the magic specific ones are bound here as well. Well, before I ramble on for another 15, 20, 30 minutes, however long this video ends up going on for, I think I'm going to call it here. If you have questions, feel free to leave it down in the comments below, but I'm going to call the video here. Thank you very much for watching. Your viewership is greatly appreciated. Have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, nighttime, whatever it is, wherever you are, and I will see y'all next time for the next guide. Peace.